When you hear the name Superman, you probably picture that red cape fluttering against the blue sky, a man in tights hovering above skyscrapers, and that iconic S logo burning bright on his chest. But what if I told you that the Superman you think you know isn't exactly the Superman who was originally imagined? Or that at one point in history, the U.S. government actually considered him such a threat they banned him from showing up in newspapers during wartime? Buckle up, because we're about to dive headfirst into some of the wildest, most unbelievable facts about the Man of Steel. And trust me, some of these will make you question everything you thought you knew about America's favorite superhero. Let's kick it off with a shocking one. Dr. 10. Superman was originally nothing like the hero we know today. Superman stands as the gold standard of superheroes. Noble, selfless, nearly invincible, and always fighting for justice. But if we hop back to the early 1930s, the version of Superman originally imagined by his creators, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, was almost the complete opposite. Believe it or not, Superman started as a villain. Yes, you heard that right. In his earliest concept, Siegel wrote a short story where Superman wasn't the savior of humanity. He was actually a bald-headed mad scientist bent on world domination. That right, the Man of Tomorrow, was first pitched as an evil genius more in line with Lex Luthor than the hero we all came to know. Siegel and Shuster were struggling artists back then, living in Cleveland, Ohio. They wanted to break into the booming world of pulp magazines and comic strips. Their first crack at Superman in 1933 was this sinister character who used mental powers to control others. He wasn't lifting cars over his head or saving kittens from trees. He was more like a twisted villain you'd expect in an old sci-fi radio drama. But after realizing that this version wasn't catching on, Siegel had a breakthrough. What if instead of being a villain, Superman was a hero with powers far beyond any normal man? He flipped the script, redesigned Superman as a strong, square-jawed do-gooder from another world, and the rest is history. When Action Comics #1 hit newsstands in 1938, readers were introduced to a very different Superman. The alien refugee from Krypton, raised in Kansas as Clark Kent, gifted with powers like flight, super strength, and X-ray vision. And suddenly, the world had a brand new kind of hero. Someone larger than life, but still deeply human at the core. Think about how insane that transformation is. Imagine if Mickey Mouse had first been created as a creepy rat who stole food from children before Walt Disney reworked him into the lovable icon. That's basically what happened with Superman. One radical shift in vision turned him from an obscure pulp villain into the first true superhero and eventually the face of American pop culture. What makes this fact even wilder is how close we came to never having Superman at all. Siegel and Shuster faced rejection after rejection from publishers. Editors said Superman was too unrealistic or too strange. Can you imagine that? The single most famous superhero in history was almost scrapped before he even got started. If Detective Comics, later DC, hadn't taken a gamble on him, we might be living in a world where Batman, Spider-Man, and the Avengers never even existed, because Superman paved the way for all of them. So, the next time you see Superman soaring on the big screen, remember, he could have been bald, evil, and bent on taking over the world. It is only thanks to a last-minute creative pivot that we got the caped crusader of truth and justice instead of yet another comic book madman. Number 9. Superman was once considered a national security threat. Meow. This one is going to sound like the plot of some parody comic, but it's completely true. During World War II, Superman's popularity skyrocketed. He wasn't just entertaining kids in comic books. He became a patriotic figure, fighting Nazis, smashing tanks, and even confronting Hitler himself in illustrated form. In many ways, he became a symbol of hope for Americans at home. But here's the twist. In 1945, the U.S. government actually forced newspapers to stop running Superman comic strips temporarily. Why? Because they thought Superman might spoil the atomic bomb. Here's what happened. In early 1945, months before the world knew about the Manhattan Project, Superman comics started running a storyline where the Man of Steel battled none other than a mad scientist creating a super bomb. In the comic, this villain planned to unleash a devastating new weapon on the world, one eerily similar to what the U.S. military was secretly developing in the deserts of New Mexico. The timing was so uncanny that government officials got nervous. They worried that the comic's writers might have inside knowledge of the Manhattan Project, or worse, that the public would start connecting the dots. Remember, back then, secrecy around the atomic bomb was tighter than anything in history. The idea that a children's ES comic could accidentally leak top-secret information was almost unthinkable, but officials weren't taking chances. So, in April 1945, Superman suddenly vanished from the daily newspaper strips. Readers were baffled. No explanation was given. He just stopped showing up, right at the peak of his wartime popularity. Only months later, after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, did people understand why? Superman had unknowingly stumbled too close to one of the biggest military secrets of all time. This wasn't the only time Superman clashed with real-world politics. During the Cold War, his stories were sometimes censored or tweaked to avoid stepping on sensitive international issues. In one 1950s storyline, Superman destroyed every nuclear weapon on Earth, something that thrilled fans but made government officials pretty uneasy. After all, comic books were read by millions of children. The last thing Washington wanted was kids asking why Superman could end nuclear war with ease while world leaders couldn't. Think about how surreal that is. A fictional superhero drawn with pen and ink was treated as if he were a genuine political actor on the world stage. In a sense, he was. He influenced how millions of kids thought about morality, justice, and even war. When you've got that kind of cultural power, it makes sense that governments kept an eye on you. There's even a famous anecdote from the 1940s where schoolteachers noticed children copying Superman's values so much that they would ask in class, "What would Superman do?" instead of, "What would Jesus do?" That's how powerful his influence had become. For some parents and officials, that was downright scary. So, yes, Superman has saved the world countless times in fiction, but in real life, his stories once scared the most powerful government on Earth into silence. That tells you just how deep his impact ran, even outside the comic panels. By now, you're already starting to see the pattern. Superman isn't just a character in spandex. He's a cultural lightning rod, reshaped over the decades to reflect America's biggest hopes and fears. From almost being a bald villain to being considered a literal threat to national security, the Man of Steel's story is already crazier than most superhero movie plots, and we've only just begun. The S on his chest doesn't just mean Superman. If you asked a group of people on the street, "Hey, what does the S on Superman's chest stand for?" 9 out of 10 would probably roll their eyes and say, Superman, duh. It feels obvious, right? He's Superman, he's got an S case closed. But in reality, the meaning of that logo goes way beyond just the first letter of his name. In fact, depending on the decade, the story, and the writer, the S has carried multiple meanings, and some of them will make you look at that emblem in a whole new way. First, let's go back to 1938 when Action Comics #1 debuted. In that original appearance, the S was just a simple logo designed by artist Joe Shuster. It was never explained, never given any Kryptonian backstory. It was just a cool letter slapped onto a hero's chest so readers could instantly recognize him. Think of it like a brand logo. Just as McDonald's has the golden arches, Superman had that bold red S. But as Superman's mythology grew, fans wanted deeper explanations. In the 1978 Superman, the movie starring Christopher Reeve, the S became more than a letter. It was the symbol of the House of El, Superman's family crest from Krypton. Suddenly, the idea wasn't that Clark Kent sewed a costume with an S on it. Instead, he was carrying a piece of his alien heritage with him everywhere he went. It was no longer just Superman. It was Kal-El, son of Krypton, wearing the sigil of his people. This Kryptonian meaning was expanded even more in modern adaptations. In Man of Steel, 2013, Henry Cavill's Superman explains to Lois Lane that the symbol isn't T and ES at all. On Krypton, it means hope. Imagine that for a second. The most famous superhero emblem in the world, seen on lunchboxes, Halloween costumes, and tattooed on millions of arms, isn't just a letter. It's literally a symbol of hope, an ancient alien crest tied to family honor and legacy. What's fascinating is how flexible that S has become across cultures. For kids, it's just Superman. For comic fans, it's the House of L. For audiences of the films, it's hope itself. And that's kind of beautiful when you think about it. It shows how a simple design, just two lines curving into a shape, can evolve into one of the most recognized symbols on Earth, right up there with the Christian cross or the Nike swoosh. There's even a funny real-world twist. In the 1990s, when DC Comics marketed Superman in Asia, they had to be careful about how the S logo was printed. In certain fonts and orientations, it resembled symbols from other cultures, which could spark misunderstandings. So even in marketing, the S carried a weight beyond just 3 strokes of red and yellow ink. Think about this in a modern American context. If you were walking down the street in Chicago or New York and you see someone wearing a Superman t-shirt, you don't need words to know what it means. That S tells you instantly. This person identifies with strength, justice, and maybe a little bit of geek pride. It's shorthand for an entire world view. How many fictional characters have a logo so iconic that it speaks louder than their name? Batman has the bat symbol. Spider-Man has the spider. But Superman SS is arguably the most famous of them all, and the fact that it means different things depending on who you ask just makes it even richer. So next time you see that S, don't just think Superman. Think hope, think heritage, think about how a single letter managed to become a cultural Rosetta Stone across decades and continents. That's the real superpower. 7. Superman once sold war bonds and fought Hitler. Now, let's travel back to the 1940s when Superman wasn't just a comic book character, he was practically a wartime celebrity. Picture America in 1940. The world was on the brink of all-out war, Europe was already engulfed in flames, and the U.S. was teetering on the edge of joining the fight. In that moment, Superman wasn't just an escape for kids flipping through comics, he became a propaganda powerhouse. One of the most striking examples was how Superman helped sell war bonds. In 1940, the Treasury Department partnered with DC Comics to feature Superman in campaigns urging Americans to support the war effort financially. Imagine being a kid who saw Superman not only stopping bank robbers but also standing behind Uncle Sam, telling your parents to buy bonds to defeat tyranny. That's powerful messaging. But it didn't stop there. Superman comics actually featured him taking on real-world enemies like Adolf Hitler and Emperor Hirohito. In one famous 1940 issue of Look magazine, Superman literally grabs Hitler and Stalin by the scruff of their necks and hauls them before the League of Nations. It was pure fantasy, of course, but to kids and adults alike, it sent a bold message. If Superman were real, the war would already be over. The radio show The Adventures of Superman, which aired from 1940 to 1951, also played a huge role in shaping public perception. One storyline had Superman battling Nazi saboteurs on American soil, reinforcing the idea that vigilance at home was just as important as victory abroad. The show became so popular that it was even used to take down real-life hate groups. In 1946, the producers ran a storyline called Clan of the Fiery Cross, which was a thinly veiled attack on the Ku Klux Klan. The story exposed the group's secret rituals and ridiculous ideology, based on real information leaked to the writers. The result? Membership in the Klan plummeted. That's right, Superman literally beat the KKK using radio waves. During World War II, Superman was such a symbol of American strength that his presence blurred the line between fiction and reality. Kids would write letters to DC Comics asking why Superman didn't just fly to Berlin, punch Hitler in the face, and end the war. Editors had to get creative in their responses, often saying things like, "Superman is focusing on helping the home front while real soldiers do their job overseas." It was a clever way to keep kids inspired while also reminding them of the bravery of actual soldiers. To put this in modern terms, imagine if Captain America or Iron Man were featured in official government ads encouraging people to recycle, ration gasoline, or enlist in the military. That's the level of cultural influence Superman had during the 1940s. He wasn't just a character on a page. He was part of America's national identity during one of the darkest times in history. The crazy part is how seriously this was taken. Politicians referenced Superman in speeches, teachers used him as a role model in classrooms, and newspapers treated his comic adventures almost like editorial cartoons. He became a moral compass wrapped in a cape. And if you're wondering whether it worked, yes, it did. War bond sales skyrocketed, kids felt empowered, and Superman cemented himself as more than entertainment. He was a weapon of morale, a fictional soldier fighting alongside millions of real ones. So when we look back and say, Superman fought Hitler, we're not exaggerating. On the page, in the airwaves, and in the minds of millions, he was punching fascism straight in the jaw. And in doing so, he became more than just the first superhero. He became a patriotic legend woven into the story of America itself. By now, we've seen Superman's logo transform from a simple letter to a universal symbol of hope, and we've watched him step off the comic book page to fight real-world dictators and hate groups. Each fact pulls back another layer of how this fictional man from Krypton managed to shape culture, politics, and even history. And the further we go, the crazier the stories get. Third, Superman actually died in 1992, and it shocked the world. If you were alive in the early 1990s, you probably remember the cultural earthquake known as the death of Superman. On November 18, 1992, DC Comics published Superman #75, the issue where the unthinkable happened. Superman was killed in battle. And this wasn't some obscure side story. This was the flagship Superman comic, hitting shelves everywhere with a black cover emblazoned with the bloody Superman logo. The storyline was simple but devastating. A monster called Doomsday tore through America, destroying everything in his path. The Justice League couldn't stop him. The military couldn't stop him. And finally, in the streets of Metropolis, Superman fought Doomsday to the death. In a brutal, no-holds-barred battle, both struck each other with such force that they collapsed, lifeless, into each other's arms. Superman was dead. This wasn't just a comic book stunt. It was a full-blown media phenomenon. News outlets like CNN, the New York Times, and Time magazine covered it as if a real celebrity had died. Lines formed outside comic shops across America, with fans buying multiple copies in hopes they'd one day be worth a fortune. Some parents even bought issues as keepsakes for their kids, believing they'd appreciate them decades later. But the emotional impact went beyond collectors. For many, Superman was a symbol of immortality. He was supposed to be invincible, untouchable. Seeing him die, seeing Lois Lane cry over his body, seeing the funeral with thousands of mourners, watching heroes drape his coffin with the American flag, was heartbreaking. It was like the death of an era. Schools discussed it. Churches referenced it. Even President Bill Clinton mentioned Superman's death in a speech about national loss. Think about that. The President of the United States referencing the passing of a fictional hero as if he were a real member of American society. That's how powerful Superman had become. Of course, comics being comics, Superman eventually came back. But here's the kicker. DC didn't just revive him a few weeks later, they actually kept him dead for months. In his absence, 4 new Supermen appeared, each claiming to carry on his legacy. Steel, Superboy, Cyborg Superman, and The Eradicator. Fans debated endlessly. Which one is the real Superman? Will the original return? Or is this the new status quo? When Superman finally did come back in 1993, it was a relief, but also a turning point. Some fans felt cheated, saying death no longer meant anything in comics. Others argued it was the greatest publicity stunt in comic book history. Either way, the death of Superman remains one of the most famous storylines ever told. To put it in modern terms, imagine if Marvel announced tomorrow that Spider-Man was being permanently killed off, not in a movie but in the actual mainline comics, and then treated it with the weight of a state funeral. That is what happened in 1992. Superman's death blurred the line between fiction and reality so much that it made headlines around the globe. And here's the eerie part. Sales of Superman #75 75 reached over 6 million copies, making it one of the best-selling single issues in comic history. Yet decades later, most of those collector AS items aren't worth much at all because so many people hoarded them. The real value turned out not to be the money, but the memory of a moment when the world truly believed Superman could die. Archer 5. His powers weren't always the same. When you think of Superman today, you probably imagine a nearly godlike being, flying at the speed of light, shrugging off bullets, shooting lasers from his eyes, freezing lakes with his breath, and hearing conversations across the planet. But here, as a twist most casual fans don't realize, Superman didn't start out with all those powers. In fact, his abilities have changed dramatically over the decades, sometimes in ways that feel downright bizarre. In his very first appearance in 1938's Action Comics #1, Superman couldn't fly. That's right, he was the Man of Steel, but his main ability was that he could leap tall buildings in a single bound. Basically, he was more like a super-strong athlete than a demigod. Artists often showed him jumping like a grasshopper across city rooftops. The iconic flying pose? That came later, in the 1940s, when animators working on the Fleischer Superman cartoons realized it was easier to draw Superman soaring through the sky than constantly bouncing. Fans loved it, and flying became canon. His other powers evolved, too. In the golden age of comics, Superman didn't have heat vision or freeze breath. Those came in later decades as writers tried to make him more versatile. And, let's be honest, more exciting. By the 1950s, Superman's abilities had grown so over the top that he could juggle planets, sneeze entire solar systems out of existence, or travel through time by sheer willpower. Comic historians call this the Silver Age Superman, a version so absurdly powerful that writers struggled to come up with threats big enough to challenge him. But then, in the 1980s, DC realized they needed to tone things down. Writer John Byrne's reboot, The Man of Steel, scaled Superman back, making his powers less godlike and more grounded. Instead of moving planets, he was once again struggling against limits. Strong, yes, but not limitless. This made for better storytelling, because if Superman can literally do anything, the drama disappears. One fascinating aspect of Superman's changing powers is how they mirror America's cultural moods. In the 1940s, when people wanted a hero to inspire them during war, Superman grew stronger and bolder. In the 1950s and 60s, when science fiction was booming, he gained more cosmic abilities. By the cynical 1980s, fans wanted a more human hero, so his power set was reduced. In a way, Superman's abilities are less about Krypton and more about what Americans wanted from their heroes at any given time. There are also some famously strange powers that have been dropped along the way. In the 1960s, Superman once had the ability to shoot miniature versions of himself out of his hands, tiny supermen, that could fight crime on their own. Yes, that really happened. He also had super ventriloquism, which allowed him to throw his voice across great distances. Needless to say, those powers didn't stick around. Modern audiences might laugh at these oddities, but they show how experimental the writers were. They weren't afraid to test boundaries, to see how far they could stretch the myth. Some ideas landed, some flopped, but together they built the Superman we recognize today. And here's where it gets really fun. Fans still debate which version of Superman is the real one. Is it the Golden Age leaping hero, the Silver Age cosmic god, the grounded 1980s protector, or the modern cinematic powerhouse who can take on the entire Justice League single-handedly? The truth is, Superman has been all of them at different times. His powers aren't fixed. They're a reflection of storytelling needs. Think about it like a long-running TV show. Characters evolve, actors change, storylines adapt to the times. Superman is no different. He's been rewritten, powered up, powered down, killed, resurrected, reimagined, and yet, through it all, he remains Superman. That adaptability is why he's lasted for more than 85 years, while so many other heroes have come and gone. So next time you see Superman flying faster than a jet or shrugging off a missile, remember, none of that was guaranteed from the start. He had to level up over decades, shaped not just by Krypton's yellow sun, but by the shifting dreams of the people who believed in him. By now, we've seen Superman not only die and return, but also evolve from a leaping strongman to a godlike figure and back again. Each version of him tells us something about the era he lived in, and about us, too. And the deeper we go, the more we realize Superman isn't just one man. He's a mirror for humanity's wildest hopes and fears, reinvented every generation. 4. Superman nearly got a 1990s movie starring Nicolas Cage. If you think superhero movies today are wild, wait until you hear this one. In the 1990s, there was almost a Superman movie that would have blown your mind for all the wrong reasons, and it would have starred none other than Nicolas Cage as the Man of Steel. Yes, you read that correctly. The eccentric Oscar-winning actor behind Face Off and National Treasure was this close to donning the red cape. The film was tentatively titled Superman Lives and had Hollywood heavyweight Tim Burton attached to direct. Burton, fresh off the success of Batman and Batman Returns, wanted to reinvent Superman for a new generation. But his vision was anything but traditional. Forget the bright blue suit and classic red trunks. Cage's Superman would have had long black hair, a shiny metallic suit, and a darker, more alien vibe. Behind the scenes, the script went through multiple rewrites. At one point, legendary producer John Peters insisted that Superman should fight a giant mechanical spider. Yes, really. Peters was obsessed with the idea of a giant spider, claiming it was the perfect predator. The spider eventually ended up in Wild Wild West instead, but for a time, it was meant to battle the Man of Steel. Photos of Nicolas Cage in the Superman costume eventually leaked online, and they've since become infamous. Imagine Cage, pale and intense with shoulder-length hair, squeezed into a glowing, skin-tight suit. It looked less like Superman and more like a rejected costume from a rave in Las Vegas. So why didn't this fever dream of a movie happen? A mix of ballooning budgets, endless script problems, and studio cold feet killed the project. By the late 1990s, Warner Bros. Decided it was too risky and pulled the plug. Fans were spared, but also left with a curiosity that still haunts comic book culture today. What's wild is how close it came to happening. Sets were built, costumes were made. Cage was fully committed. Tim Burton later said he still regrets not making the film, claiming it would have been a bold reimagining. Some fans agree, arguing that Superman desperately needed a shakeup in the 1990s. Others think it would have been a train wreck so bad it might have killed Superman on screen for decades. To put it in perspective, imagine if Marvel announced tomorrow that they were making a gritty Spider-Man movie with Keanu Reeves playing Peter Parker, directed by David Lynch, and the villain was a 50-foot tarantula. That's basically what Superman Lives would have been for audiences in the 1990s. And here's the kicker. Nicolas Cage finally did get to play Superman, in a weird, roundabout way. In 2023's The Flash movie, there's a cameo where Cage's Superman appears in CGI, complete with long hair, battling a giant spider. It was a wink at the failed Burton project, a way of finally letting Cage step into the cape, even if only for a few seconds. It's proof that even Superman's failures become part of his myth. The movie that never happened still influences pop culture, living on as one of the greatest what-ifs in Hollywood history. 3. Superman inspired. Real-life heroics and protests. We've talked about Superman fighting fictional villains and even standing in as wartime propaganda. But here's a fact that proves just how much his influence bled into real life. Superman has inspired not just entertainment, but actual acts of courage, activism, and even political protest. One of the most famous examples comes from the 1940s radio show The Adventures of Superman. We mentioned earlier how the show took on Nazis and saboteurs, but in 1946 it did something even bolder. It took on the Ku Klux Klan. In a storyline called Clan of the Fiery Cross, Superman battled a thinly disguised version of the Klan, exposing their secret rituals and mocking their racist ideology. The writers got their information from an activist who had infiltrated the real KKK. And when kids heard it on the radio, they started repeating those rituals and codes at school, totally embarrassing Klan members in real life. Historians say the storyline did serious damage to the Klan's recruitment efforts. Think about that. A fictional superhero crippled a hate group more effectively than some government campaigns ever did. But Superman's influence doesn't stop with dismantling extremists. Over the decades, countless people have credited him with inspiring real-world acts of bravery. Police officers, firefighters, and even ordinary citizens have said they tried to live by the Superman code, putting others before themselves, standing up for the weak, and doing what's right even when it's hard. Some parents have named their kids after Clark Kent or Kal-El because they wanted them to embody those values. In 2001, after the September 11th attacks, Superman once again became a rallying symbol. Comic book covers showed him standing solemnly beside firefighters and rescue workers, not overshadowing them, but honoring them. DC even released special issues where Superman reflected on real-world tragedy, reminding readers that the greatest heroes weren't fictional. They were the first responders running into burning buildings. Superman has also been used in protests and social movements. In 2013, activists in Turkey dressed as Superman while demonstrating against government corruption, holding signs that read, "We need a hero." In Brazil, protesters wore the Superman logo during rallies against inequality. The image of Superman, chest puffed out, cape blowing, has become a universal shorthand for resistance against injustice, regardless of the language or culture. And then there are the deeply personal stories. In America, you'll find children in hospitals who wear Superman pajamas or capes to chemo treatments because it makes them feel stronger. You'll hear about kids who were bullied but found courage by imagining what Superman would do. One boy in Illinois even stopped a younger child from being hit by a car, later saying he thought about how Superman always protected people. All of this shows something profound. Superman isn't just fiction. He's an idea, an ideal. And when an idea is strong enough, it seeps into reality and changes lives. That's what separates Superman from almost every other character. Batman may inspire people to dress up on Halloween, but Superman has inspired people to stand up to hate groups, protest injustice, and even save lives. He represents the very best version of ourselves, and people, consciously or not, try to live up to it. So when we say Superman is more than just a comic book hero, this is what we mean. He's a myth woven into our culture, as powerful in the real world as he is in fiction. And the fact that a man in a cape and tights could have such an impact says a lot about the power of storytelling itself. The 2, Superman, was the first true superhero in history. It's easy to take superheroes for granted today. You can't walk into a movie theater without seeing a cape, a cowl, or someone shooting lasers out of their eyes. But here's the thing. Before Superman, there was no such thing as a superhero. He wasn't just the first popular one. He literally created the genre. When Action Comics #1 debuted in June 1938, there had been pulp heroes before, characters like Doc Savage, The Shadow, and Flash Gordon. They were adventurous, strong, and daring, but they were still just extraordinary humans. Superman, on the other hand, was something brand new, a being from another world with powers no human could ever achieve. He leapt higher, ran faster, and lifted heavier than anyone else. He was extraordinary not because of gadgets or training, but because of who he was. That was revolutionary. The moment Superman hit shelves, the comic industry changed overnight. Kids and adults devoured his adventures, and rival publishers scrambled to copy him. Within a year, dozens of new super characters appeared: Batman, Captain Marvel, now Shazam, Wonder Woman. They all came in Superman's wake. Without him, there might not be Marvel or DC as we know them. No Avengers, no Justice League, no Spider-Man or Iron Man. Superman cracked open a brand new storytelling formula, and everyone else built on it. Culturally, Superman tapped into something Americans desperately needed in the late 1930s. The Great Depression had left people broke and broken. Crime was rising. War loomed overseas. And here came a hero who was incorruptible, unstoppable, and fought not for wealth or glory but for ordinary people. In early comics, Superman didn't just fight mad scientists. He took on slumlords, corrupt politicians, and greedy business tycoons. He was a champion of the little guy at a time when the little guy had been beaten down for years. Superman's creation was such a big deal that even academics credit him with starting the Age of Superheroes. Before him, comics were just funny pages and pulp stories. After him, they became myths. In fact, Superman is often described as America's mythology. Just as ancient Greeks had Hercules, Americans got Superman. He was larger than life, born from another world, yet deeply tied to human struggles. And that's the craziest fact of all. Superman wasn't just the first superhero, he was the blueprint. He set the mold that billions of dollars of entertainment still follow today. Every time you watch a Marvel movie, every time you see a kid wearing a cape, you're seeing the ripple effect of that one creation in 1938. Superman wasn't he just the start of a trend. He was the birth of a new genre of modern mythology. #1. Superman remains a billion-dollar global icon. After more than 85 years, you'd think Superman's popularity might fade. But here is the final jaw-dropper. Superman isn't he just still around. He's bigger than ever. A billion-dollar icon whose influence spans the entire planet. From comics to movies to video games, Superman is everywhere. He's been portrayed by actors like Christopher Reeve, Henry Cavill, and even, briefly, Nicolas Cage. His stories have been translated into dozens of languages, and kids in countries from Japan to Brazil to Nigeria know the name Superman. You could fly to almost any airport in the world and find merchandise with that famous S logo, shirts, hats, backpacks, even baby bibs. Financially, the Superman brand is worth billions. He's headlined blockbuster movies grossing hundreds of millions, appeared in cartoons watched by generations, and inspired merchandise that sells non-stop. DC Comics might technically own him, but Superman belongs to the world now. But his impact isn't just financial. Superman has become shorthand for strength and virtue across cultures. Athletes are called Superman when they break records. Teachers call kids Superman when they ace a test or show courage. In everyday conversation, saying, "He's a real Superman," means someone went above and beyond. His name has transcended fiction. Even science has borrowed from him. Astronauts have referenced Superman when describing spaceflight. Soldiers have painted the S on their gear. Doctors have used Superman imagery to inspire sick children. In one famous case, a paralyzed man in the U.S. underwent groundbreaking stem cell therapy and walked again. Newspapers called him the real Superman. And here's the emotional part. Superman endures because he represents something timeless. Unlike darker heroes, he isn't about vengeance or trauma. He's about hope. That's why his symbol resonates as much today as it did in 1938. In a world that feels chaotic, the idea of a hero who uses unlimited power only for good is comforting. It's a fantasy, yes, but also a challenge. Superman dares us to believe we can all be better than we are. Think about this. Most fictional characters fade after a generation. Pulp heroes like The Shadow or Doc Savage are footnotes today. Even many once popular superheroes have been forgotten. But Superman keeps coming back, decade after decade, always relevant, always inspiring. He's not just a character. He's part of human culture now. So when we say Superman is the greatest superhero of all time, it's not just nostalgia talking. It's history, economics, and sociology rolled into one. He was the first. He's still the most recognized. And he continues to represent hope for millions. That's why Superman will outlive us all, flying into the hearts of future generations long after we're gone. So, there you have it, the 10 most mind-blowing facts about Superman. From nearly being created as a villain, to being censored by the U.S. government, to inspiring real-life protests and heroics, to nearly being played by Nicolas Cage, all the way to cementing himself as the very first superhero and still reigning as the greatest icon of them all. Superman isn't just a comic character. He's a cultural force, a billion-dollar myth, and a beacon of hope in a world that needs it now more than ever. If you like this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next deep dive into the world's most fascinating stories. And let us know in the comments, which of these Superman facts blew your mind the most? Because at the end of the day, Superman's greatest power isn't super strength or flight. It's his ability to keep us inspired generation after generation, and that's a superpower worth celebrating.